She was trading her life for their survival. Lady Madeline Ashford knew the rumours. Everyone in London did. They called him the Beast of Blackwood, a ruthless, scarred duke who had supposedly driven his first wife to madness. And now, to save her father from debtor's prison and her family from utter ruin, she had agreed to marry him. She walked down the aisle toward a man whose face was a mask of cold fury, her heart pounding with pure terror. But it was on their wedding night, as she braced for a monster's cruelty, that he finally reached for her, and his simple touch left her utterly, impossibly speechless. The hammering on the great oak door of Ashford Manor felt like a death knell. Lady Madeline Ashford, her hands clenched tightly in the thin fabric of her worn day dress, stood frozen in the grand foyer. The marble floor, once polished to a mirror shine, was now dull, reflecting the grey, hopeless light of a London afternoon. "They are here, Maddie," her younger brother, Thomas, whispered, his voice cracking. At 16, he was trying to be the man of the house, but his pale face and trembling hands betrayed his fear. Madeline placed a hand on his shoulder. "It will be all right, Thomas. Go to Amelia. Keep her in the nursery. Do not let her come down." He nodded, his youthful eyes filled with a desperate gratitude, and bolted up the winding staircase. The hammering came again, louder this time, impatient and brutal. Madeline took a deep breath and walked to the door herself. The butler, Higgins, a man who had served their family for 40 years, had been dismissed 2 weeks prior. They could no longer afford his wages. She pulled the heavy iron latch. 2 men stood on the steps, their expressions devoid of pity. They were not gentlemen. They were agents of the bank, men who profited from the ruin of others. "Lady Madeline Ashford?" the taller one asked, though it wasn't a question. He held a sheaf of papers. "I am," she replied, lifting her chin. She would not give them the satisfaction of her tears. "By order of the Crown Court, acting on behalf of the creditors, represented by Lord Harcourt and associated lenders, we are here to execute the writ of seizure for non-payment of debts attributed to your father, Lord Robert Ashford." "My father is not here," she said, her voice shaking only slightly. "That does not matter, my lady. The house and its contents are forfeit. You have 1 hour to collect your personal effects." The word struck her like a physical blow. 1 hour! 1 hour to vacate the only home she had ever known. This was it. This was the end. Her father, a kind but weak man, had gambled away their fortune, their legacy, and their future, all at the tables of men like Lord Harcourt, a name that had become a curse in their household. "Please," she whispered, a new, colder dread seeping in. "My siblings. My sister is only 8. 1 hour, the man repeated, pushing past her into the foyer. He began to assess the value of the tapestries on the wall, his eyes cold and calculating. Madeline stumbled back, panic rising like bile in her throat. She ran, not to her room, but to her father's study. She found him just as she expected, slumped over his desk, his head in his hands, an empty bottle of brandy on the floor beside him. "Father," she said, her voice sharp. "They are here. They are taking the house. Now!" Lord Ashford looked up, his face a ruin of broken veins and despair. "Maddie, I tried to get an extension. Harcourt, he's ruthless. He refused." "What are we to do?" she cried, the facade of her strength finally cracking. "Where will Thomas and Amelia go? We will be on the streets." No, he stammered, fumbling in his desk drawer. He pulled out a single, pristine envelope, sealed not with his own crest, but with a stark, black wax device she did not recognize, a raven clutching a stone. There is one final option. Madeline stared at the envelope. It seemed to suck the very light from the room. What is that? It is a proposal. From the Duke of Blackwood. Madeline felt the blood drain from her face. Arthur, the Duke of Blackwood. If Lord Harcourt was a curse, Blackwood was a horror story. The Beast of Blackwood. He was a recluse, a man of immense, terrifying wealth who had not been seen in London society for 5 years. Not since the incident. His first wife, the beautiful Lady Isabella, had thrown herself from the battlements of his ancestral home, Blackwood Hall. The rumours were dark and whispered, that he had driven her to it, that his cruelty had fractured her mind. They said he was disfigured, that a terrible scar marked him as a monster. A proposal, she breathed, recoiling from the letter. He knows of our debt. All of it. He has offered to absolve it entirely. Lord Ashford could not meet her eyes. He will take responsibility for the Ashford estate, restore it, and provide a generous dowry for Amelia. He will fund Thomas's commission in the Royal Navy. Madeline listened, her dread growing with every word. This was not charity. This was a purchase. In exchange, for what? Her father finally looked at her, his eyes swimming with the shame of a man who had failed his child. In exchange for your hand in marriage, he requires a duchess. He requires an heir. The room spun. Marry the Beast of Blackwood. Become the replacement for the wife he had allegedly destroyed. Be locked away in that dark, northern castle with a man whispered to be a monster. She looked from her father's pathetic, broken form to the letter. She thought of Thomas, his bright future cut short. She thought of little Amelia, her innocence about to be shattered by the grinding poverty of the streets. The sounds of the bailiffs echoed from the foyer, the metallic scrape of them prying a silver candlestick from the wall. This was not a choice. It was a sentence. Send them away, Madeline said, her voice suddenly cold and dead. What? Her father asked. The bailiffs. Send them away. Tell them the debt is being handled. She picked up the black sealed envelope, her hand steady. And send a reply to the Duke of Blackwood. Tell him I accept his terms. Her father began to weep with relief, but Madeline felt nothing. She had just traded her life, her body, and her soul. She was to be the Duchess of Blackwood, a title that felt less like an honor and more like a shroud. She clutched the letter, the sharp edges of the wax seal digging into her palm. She had saved her family, but she had damned herself. The wedding was set for 1 week later. There was no engagement period, no ball, no flurry of societal announcements. It was a transaction, and the Duke of Blackwood was brutally efficient. He did not come to London himself. His solicitors handled everything. The Ashford debts vanished overnight. The bailiffs disappeared. Food returned to the pantry, and Higgins was rehired, his expression one of profound, unspoken pity for Madeline. A single enormous crate arrived from a London modiste, containing a wedding dress of the finest Brussels lace. It was beautiful, opulent, and utterly impersonal. It had been chosen by a stranger for a stranger. Madeline saw her future husband for the first time on her wedding day. She stood at the back of St. Margaret's Church, which the Duke had rented for the hour. It was almost entirely empty. Her father, looking smaller than ever, stood beside her. Thomas and Amelia sat in the front pew, their faces pale. There were no guests on the groom's side, not a single friend, not one family member. Then he entered from the vestry, and the sparse congregation drew a collective breath. Arthur, Duke of Blackwood, was a giant. He was taller than any man she had ever seen, broad-shouldered and dressed in severe, impeccable black. The rumors she saw with a sickening lurch were true. A vicious scar ran from his left temple across his cheekbone and disappeared into the high collar of his coat. It pulled the corner of his eye and his mouth into a permanent, forbidding grimace. His hair was as black as his name, and his eyes, as he glanced back at her, were the color of chips of ice. He looked away immediately, his attention fixed on the altar. He was not a groom anticipating his bride. He was a man waiting for a late business appointment. "It is time, Maddie," her father whispered, his hand shaking on her arm. She put one foot in front of the other. The walk down the aisle was the longest of her life. She was not walking toward a new beginning. She was walking to her executioner. Every step was a drumbeat of monster, madness, ruin. When she reached the altar, her father placed her hand in the Duke's. His grip was not tight, but it was inescapable. His hand was large and covered in a fine leather glove. It was also unnervingly warm. She risked a glance up at his face. He was staring straight ahead at the vicar, his jaw set. The scar tissue was stark against his pale skin. He was, she thought, with a detached sense of dread, utterly terrifying. The vicar, a nervous man named Dr. Phelps, rushed through the service. If any man knows any just cause why they may not lawfully be joined together, Madeline felt a wild urge to scream. "I do. He is a monster. I am terrified. This is a purchase." But she remained silent. The Duke's voice, when he spoke his vows, startled her. It was not the gravelly roar she had expected. It was a low, resonant baritone, clear and precise. It held no warmth, but it held no malice either. It was empty. "Aye, Arthur. Take thee, Madeline." When it was her turn, her voice was a reedy whisper. "Aye, Madeline, take thee, Arthur." He slid a heavy gold band onto her finger. It was cold. "I now pronounce you man and wife. You may, kiss the bride." The vicar looked as though he would rather be anywhere else. Madeline's heart stopped. She turned to her husband, her new owner. She shut her eyes, bracing for a brutal, possessive kiss. She expected his mouth to be hard, his grip painful. A beat of silence stretched. She could feel his presence, the sheer size of him looming over her. After a moment that felt like an eternity, something brushed her forehead. It was his lips, barely grazing her skin, as cold and brief as a snowflake. She opened her eyes. He was already turning away, signing the register. The kiss had been a mockery of one, a gesture of pure, dismissive duty. The journey to Blackwood Hall was undertaken in a massive black carriage bearing the ducal crest. It was a fortress on wheels, sprung for comfort, but built for intimidation. Madeline sat opposite her husband, the silence stretching for hours. She stared out the window, watching London's familiar streets give way to the green of the countryside, which in turn darkened into the stark, misty hills of the north. With every mile, she felt the invisible chain between herself and this silent, scarred man pulling tighter. He did not speak. He did not read. He simply sat, his gloved hands resting on his knees, and stared out his own window. She tried to study him from beneath her lashes. He was not old, perhaps 35, but he seemed ancient. The scar, she realized, was not the most terrifying thing about him. It was his stillness. He was a man encased in ice, so controlled that he barely seemed to breathe. As dusk fell, the carriage rumbled through a set of massive iron gates. They passed through a forest of skeletal ancient trees before the house itself came into view. Blackwood Hall was not a house. It was a citadel. It rose from the mists, a sprawling Gothic monstrosity of black stone, all towers and sharp angles, silhouetted against a bruised purple sky. This was where his first wife had died. This was her prison. The carriage stopped. A footman opened the door. The Duke descended without a word, turning not to help her, but to walk up the steps. A line of servants waited in the entrance hall, their black and grey uniforms making them look like a line of solemn crows. They were visibly terrified of their master. An older woman with a face like carved granite stepped forward. "Your Grace," she curtsied, her voice stiff. "Welcome home. I am Mrs. Croft, the housekeeper. We have prepared the Duchess's suite. Supper will be served in 1 hour." "Thank you, Mrs. Croft," the Duke's deep voice echoed in the cavernous cold hall. "See to the Duchess. I will be in my study." He didn't look at Madeline. He didn't acknowledge her as his wife. He simply strode past the line of servants and disappeared down a dark corridor, his footsteps swallowed by the shadows. "This way, Your Grace," Mrs. Croft said, her expression unreadable. Madeline, exhausted and numb with dread, followed the housekeeper up the grand, cold staircase, every portrait on the wall seeming to watch her with pitying eyes. She was the new Duchess, the new sacrifice. The Duchess's suite was a vast, opulent cavern of a room. It was dominated by a fireplace large enough to stand in, and a 4-poster bed so tall it required a set of steps. The furniture was heavy, dark mahogany, and the tapestries depicted grim hunting scenes. A fire had been lit, but it did little to dispel the bone-deep chill of the stone walls. A young, trembling maid named Sarah helped Madeline out of her wedding dress and into a simple silk nightgown. It felt thin and inadequate, a pathetic defense against the cold and the man who was her husband. Will that be all, Your Grace?" Sarah asked, her eyes darting toward the heavy door that connected to the Duke's chambers. "Yes, Sarah, thank you." The girl curtsied so low she nearly fell over and practically fled the room. Madeline was left alone. She sat on the edge of a velvet chaise, her hands clasped in her lap, and waited. She waited for the monster. She waited for the man who had bought her, the man who, according to rumor, was capable of unspeakable cruelty. This was the wedding night. She knew her duty. She was here to provide an heir. She braced herself for a brutal, clinical, or perhaps even violent consummation. An hour passed. The clock on the mantel ticked like a hammer. Another hour. The fire began to die down. Madeline was so taut with fear and exhaustion that she almost screamed when the connecting door finally opened. He stood in the doorway, and he seemed to fill it. He had removed his formal coat and cravat. He was in his shirt sleeves, the white fabric stark against the darkness of the hall behind him. His scar looked even more brutal in the flickering firelight. He did not move for a long moment, simply watching her. She sat frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs, so hard she thought it might break. Please, she thought, though she didn't know what she was pleading for. Be quick. He closed the door behind him, the sound of the latch clicking into place, echoing like a gunshot. He walked into the room, not toward her, but toward the fireplace. He picked up the poker and stoked the embers, bringing the fire back to life. He still had not spoken. The silence was a physical weight, pressing down on her. Finally, he turned. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. His icy blue eyes raked over her, from her disheveled hair down to her bare feet on the cold floor. She shivered, pulling the thin silk tighter around her. She expected him to cross the room, to pull her from the chaise, to throw her onto the bed. Instead, he spoke. His voice was low and held a rough, tired quality she hadn't heard at the church. "You are cold." It was not a question. It was a statement. He walked to a large wardrobe, pulled out a heavy velvet dressing gown, it was clearly his, and walked toward her. Madeline flinched, pressing herself back into the chaise. Her breath hitched, a small, terrified sound. He stopped instantly, 5 feet away from her. He looked at his own hand, holding the gown, as if he didn't know how it had gotten there. He dropped the gown onto a nearby chair. "I will not harm you," he said. His voice was flat. He turned away and walked toward the bed. Madeline squeezed her eyes shut, her body rigid. This was it. She heard the creak of the bed frame, but it was not the sound of a man getting into it. She opened her eyes. The Duke of Blackwood had picked up one of the heavy pillows and a thick blanket. He was walking away from the bed. He went to the long, uncomfortable-looking chaise lounge by the window, the farthest point in the room from the bed, and threw the pillow down. Madeline stared, her mind unable to process what she was seeing. What are you doing?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. He began to unfasten the buttons on his waistcoat, his back to her. "I am going to sleep. I suggest you do the same. You are clearly exhausted." "But the bed." He turned, his expression unreadable, the scar tissue pulling his mouth taut. "The bed is yours, Your Grace. I have no intention of sharing it." He was rejecting her. The relief was so sudden and so profound that it made her dizzy, but it was followed by a spike of confusion. "But the contract, the heir." For the first time, something flashed in his eyes. It wasn't anger, it was something like bitter regret. "The contract was to save your family from Lord Harcourt. It has done so. Your father is safe. Your siblings are provided for. You have fulfilled your part of the bargain by simply being here." He paused, then added, his voice even lower, "This marriage is a protection for you, not a prison. I will not lay a hand on you, madame. You have my word as a peer of the realm." He sat on the chaise, pulled off his boots, and let them drop to the floor with a heavy thud. He did not lie down, but sat, leaning his head back against the cushion as if he were a guard on duty. Madeline could not move. She had prepared for a beast. She had prepared for pain, for humiliation, for a cold, loveless duty. She had not prepared for this strange, cold courtesy, this absolute rejection. She remained on her own chaise, her body trembling with the adrenaline of anticlimax. The fire crackled. The Duke sat in the shadows, perfectly still, his eyes closed. After a long time, she realized she was shivering uncontrollably. The fire was dying again. She was too scared to move, to get the blanket from the bed, to do anything but watch him. He must have heard the chatter of her teeth. His eyes snapped open, pinning her in the dark. With a sigh that sounded more like a growl of self-recrimination, he stood up. Madeline froze again. He was crossing the room. He was coming for her. He stopped directly in front of her, looming over her. She looked up, into his scarred, harsh face. He looked down at her, his expression a mask of shadows. She saw his hand, his bare hand, no longer gloved, lift. She shut her eyes, bracing for a blow. And then she felt it. It was not a hand, it was just his fingers. He didn't touch her skin. He reached for the heavy woolen throw blanket draped over the back of the chaise she was on. He lifted it, his movement slow, deliberate. As he pulled it free, the backs of his fingers brushed against her shoulder. His skin was rough, calloused, but it was shockingly warm. The brief contact sent a jolt through her that had nothing to do with fear. It was human. He draped the heavy blanket over her, tucking it firmly around her shoulders and her feet. His movements were efficient, impersonal, like a soldier tending to a comrade. But as he pulled away, His thumb brushed the side of her neck, just below her ear. It was an accident. It had to be. A simple, unintentional graze of skin on skin. But it lingered. It was a touch devoid of malice, devoid of lust, but full of a strange, solid warmth. It wasn't the touch of a monster. It wasn't the touch of a beast. It was the touch of a man. He retreated to his chaise without a word and settled back into the shadows. Madeline sat under the weight of the blanket, her skin tingling where he had touched her. She had been ready for cruelty. She had been ready for indifference. She had not been ready for this gentle, almost hesitant gesture. He had married her to save her family, only to treat her as a piece of fragile porcelain he dared not break. She stared into the darkness where he sat, her new husband, the Beast of Blackwood. And for the first time since she had seen his name on that letter, she was utterly, completely speechless. Madeline woke to the pale, misty dawn, her neck stiff. She was still on the chaise, covered by the heavy blanket. The room was empty. The Duke was gone. The connecting door was firmly closed. For a moment, she wondered if she had dreamed the entire encounter. But the indentation on the chaise cushion opposite her, and the pillow and blanket left neatly folded upon it, proved otherwise. She rang for the maid, Sarah, who entered with a pitcher of hot water, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear, and, seeing Madeline unharmed, a flicker of surprise. "His Grace, he has already breakfasted, Your Grace," Sarah stammered. "He is in his study. He left instructions that you are not to be disturbed. You are free to do as you wish." "As I wish," Madeline repeated. The words sounded foreign. "Yes, Your Grace. The grounds, the library, whatever you please. He only requests you do not enter the north wing. The north wing. The place where his first wife." "Thank you, Sarah. That will be all." After dressing in one of the new, somber gowns provided for her, Madeline began her exploration. "As I wish" felt like a test. Blackwood Hall was even more imposing by day. It was a labyrinth of cold corridors, vast, dust-sheeted ballrooms, and grim portrait galleries of the Duke's ancestors. The servants were ghosts. They would appear, curtsy or bow, and melt back into the shadows, all of them bearing the same pinched, fearful expression. They did not fear her. They feared their master. She found the library, a magnificent two-story room filled with thousands of books. It was the only room in the house that felt truly alive. A fire was lit, and a pot of tea had been left for her on a side table, a small, thoughtful gesture. But from whom? She wandered the grounds. They were wild and overgrown, the gardens choked with weeds, all except for one small, hidden clearing, shielded by a high stone wall. She found the gate unlocked. Inside was a perfect, meticulously kept rose garden, white roses, blush pink, and a deep, velvety crimson. Someone tended to this place with extraordinary care. As she reached out to touch a perfect white bloom, a voice startled her. They were his mother's! Madeline spun around. Mrs. Croft, the housekeeper, stood at the entrance, her hands clasped. "Mrs. Croft, I didn't mean to intrude." "You are the Duchess. You cannot intrude," the woman stated flatly. "His Grace. He is the only one who comes here, the only one who has, in 5 years." Madeline looked at the thorny, complex bushes. He does this. He's a gardener." Mrs. Croft's stern expression softened, just for a moment. "He is many things, Your Grace. Things people do not see." She then seemed to catch herself, and the mask of efficiency snapped back into place. "Dinner is at 7. The Duke will expect you to be present." As Madeline walked back to the house, a new seed of confusion was planted. A man who tended roses? A man who slept on a chaise to honor a promise to a stranger? It did not fit the portrait of the monster. Her curiosity, a dangerous, flickering flame, was now aimed at the one place she had been forbidden. The north wing. She found it late that afternoon. It was not locked or barred. The doors were simply closed. A thick layer of dust covered the floor in the hallway leading to it, proving Sarah's words. No one came here. She pushed the door open. The air inside was stale and cold. This part of the house was different. The architecture was older, almost medieval. She walked down a long corridor, her footsteps echoing. At the end was a set of carved wooden doors. She pushed them open. It was not a bedchamber. It was an art studio. The room was vast, with a high glass-paned ceiling that flooded the space with a cold, clear light. Canvases, dozens of them, were stacked against the walls. Some were covered in sheets, others were bare. In the center of the room, an easel stood, draped in a cloth, as if the artist had just stepped away. This had been Isabella's room, the mad first wife. Madeline walked toward the easel, her heart pounding. She felt like a trespasser, a grave robber. She lifted the cloth. It was a portrait. Unfinished, it was a painting of him, of Arthur. He was younger, his face unmarred. He was not smiling, but his expression was soft. His eyes, fixed on the painter, were filled with a light she could not name. It was a look of profound, unguarded devotion. This was not the face of a man who would drive his wife to madness. "What are you doing in here?" The voice was a whip-crack of ice and fury. Madeline screamed, dropping the cloth. Arthur stood in the doorway, his face a thundercloud. The stillness was gone. In its place was a white-hot rage that seemed to roll off him in waves. His scar was a vivid, angry red. The door was open," she stammered, backing away. I was just... Get out." He bit the words out, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "I'm sorry, I just saw the painting. Get out." He took a step into the room, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. This was the beast. This was the monster she had been warned about. This was the rage that had, perhaps, driven a woman to her death. Terrified, Madeline scrambled past him, her shoulder brushing his chest. He was as unmoving as a stone wall. She ran from the north wing, not stopping until she was back in the perceived safety of her own suite, the connecting door firmly shut. She collapsed onto the chaise, her body shaking. She had been wrong. The kindness, the rose garden, the gentle touch, it was all a facade. She had crossed a line, and she had seen the truth. He was a man of terrible, violent passions, guarding the ghosts of his past with a dragon's fury. That night, at dinner, the long, polished table felt like a battlefield. He sat at one end, she at the other. The servant served the meal in terrified silence. He did not look at her. He did not speak. He ate with the same cold, controlled precision, but the air around him vibrated with contained anger. When the meal was over, he stood. "Do not," he said, his voice carrying down the length of the table, "ever go to that wing again. It is not for you." He left her alone in the massive dining room, the silence a condemnation. Later that night, she lay in her cold, empty bed, staring at the connecting door. She expected him to enter, to unleash the rest of his fury. She didn't know what, but the door remained closed. She heard no sound from his room. He did not come. He did not even sleep on the chaise. He was leaving her utterly, completely alone, a prisoner in her own rooms, isolated by his rage. The silence was, she decided, far more terrifying than his anger. For 3 days, Madeline lived in a state of suspended terror. She was a ghost in a house full of them. She saw her husband only at dinner, where the crushing, furious silence remained unbroken. He did not acknowledge her presence. He ate, and he left. The connecting door to her suite remained firmly shut, and she was left to the cold comfort of her solitary bed. The staff, sensing the Duke's displeasure, avoided her. Only Mrs. Croft maintained her stiff professionalism, ensuring Madeline's meals were served and her rooms were cleaned, but she offered no conversation, her face a mask of granite. Madeline was trapped. She had been warned, and she had seen the beast. But the image from the studio haunted her. The unfinished portrait, the look in his eyes. It was a contradiction she could not solve. The rage he'd shown her felt real, but so did the devotion in that painting. On the 4th day, she could bear the isolation no longer. She had to know. She had to understand the woman whose shadow she lived in. If she was to survive this marriage, this prison, she had to understand the monster who held the key. She had to go back to the north wing. She waited until she knew he was occupied. After dinner, she heard him ride out, the powerful thunder of his stallion's hooves fading into the night. It was reckless. It was defiant. But she had to know. Her hands shaking, she lit a candelabra and made her way through the sleeping, dark house. The north wing was as she had left it, cold and still. She pushed open the studio doors, the creak echoing in the oppressive silence. She went straight to the easel. The painting of Arthur. She studied it. The man he had been. Then she turned her attention to the rest of the room. The sheets covering the other canvases were thick with dust. She pulled one off. It was a landscape of the moors, wild and beautiful. Another was a portrait of a child, a boy she didn't recognize. She moved through the room, unveiling Isabella's life, canvas by canvas. They were brilliant, full of life and color and passion. This was not the work of a woman descending into madness. Then, tucked in a dark corner, she found a small, leather-bound book on a writing desk, knocked over and half hidden under a stack of sketches. It was a diary. Isabella's. Her heart leapt into her throat. This was the ultimate transgression. She sat in the dusty chair, her candle a tiny pool of light in the massive, dark room, and she opened the book. The first entries were joyful, full of her love for my Arthur. She wrote of his quiet strength, his surprising gentleness, his secret passion for poetry. She joked about his beastly reputation in London, a wall he built to keep the superficial world at bay. He is no beast, Isabella wrote. He is a man who feels everything too deeply. He is my rock, my sanctuary. Madeline's hands trembled. This was the man in the portrait. This was the man who tended roses. She read on, her blood turning to ice. The entries began to change, 3 years into the marriage. October 14th. I feel unwell again. My hands tremble so. I dropped my brush twice. Arthur is worried, his brow furrowed in that way he has. He fusses over me, bringing me broth, but it only makes me sicker. November 2nd. The physician from the village, Dr. Harris, says it is a woman's malady, a weakness of the nerves. He has prescribed a tonic. It tastes foul, but he insists I take it thrice daily. November 20th. I am so afraid. My mind is slipping. I see shadows in the corners. I cannot hold a thought. I screamed at Arthur today. I accused him of the most monstrous things. His face, oh God, his face. He looked as if I had stabbed him. He just took it. He just held me and let me weep. Madeline felt a wave of nausea. She knew this. This was the madness. December 5th. It is the tonic. It must be. I feel worse after I take it. My hair is falling out. My vision blurs. I told Dr. Harris, but he just smiled. That smile. He said I was hysterical. He brought a new bottle today. He poured it himself. December 12th. Lord Harcourt visited today. He is Arthur's friend. He is always here. He came to see me while Arthur was in London. He sat by my bed. He told me I looked beautiful, even in my sickness. He offered to pour my tonic for me. His hand brushed mine. It was cold. Lord Harcourt, her father's creditor, the man who had forced this marriage. Madeline flipped forward, her fingers clumsy. The handwriting grew erratic, spidery. January 3rd. I know. I saw him. Harcourt. He was in the pantry. He was talking to Dr. Harris. He was giving him money. A lot of money. And a small vial. I heard him say, just a little more. Enough to complete the treatment. Harris looked terrified. But my lord, she is so weak. And Harcourt. He laughed. He said, that is the point, you fool. The Duke needs to be free. January 4th. He is poisoning me. Harcourt is poisoning me. He wants me gone. He wants, I don't know what he wants. My God. Arthur. He doesn't see it. He trusts Harcourt. He thinks I am mad. I tried to tell him. I threw the cup. I sounded like a lunatic. I have to show him. It was the last entry. Madeline dropped the book. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. Isabella wasn't mad. She was murdered. Slowly, cruelly, with arsenic. It was a common ingredient in tonics, and in some green paints, like Chialet's green. An artist's studio would be the perfect place to hide it. And Lord Harcourt was the murderer. A new, terrible understanding dawned. The duel, the scar. Arthur hadn't driven his wife to madness. He had been forced to watch it. And when he found out the truth, I told you, a voice came from the darkness, not to come here. Madeline gasped, spinning around. He was there in the doorway, silhouetted against the hall light. He wasn't angry. His voice was dead, hollow. He had not ridden out. He had been watching her. She wasn't mad, Madeline whispered, tears streaming down her face. She held up the diary. She was murdered. You knew. He stepped into the light. His face was a mask of agony, aged a decade by his grief. I found her journal, he said, his voice raw. A week after she jumped. She didn't jump to end her life. She jumped to escape him. Harcourt had come to see her. She was trying to get away. He walked to the window, his back to her. I found it. I read it. I was too late. I trusted him. He was my oldest friend. He coveted my estate, my title, my wife. When she refused his advances before we were married, he decided to destroy her. To destroy me. The scar, Madeline breathed. I challenged him to a duel the day after I found the diary. Arthur touched his cheek. He was always a better shot. I was blind with rage. I wanted to kill him, but I only wounded him. He fled to France. There was no proof. The physician, Harris, vanished. It was just the word of a grieving, mad duke against a respected lord. He turned to her, his eyes blazing with a cold, 5-year-old fury. I have spent 5 years systematically, piece by piece, destroying his finances. I have bought his debts, ruined his investments, bled him dry. I made him the monster I was rumored to be. And suddenly, Madeline understood everything. My father, she said, her voice barely audible. My father's debts. They weren't to the bank. They were to Harcourt, Arthur confirmed, his voice flat. He held the note on your estate. He was going to ruin your father, throw you and your siblings onto the street. And he was going to make sure I knew it. He was going to parade your ruin in front of me, another victim of my curse, another life I had failed to protect. He looked at her, his gaze so intense it pinned her to the spot. I could not let him have you, Madeline. I could not let him destroy another innocent life as a way to get to me. So you married me. It wasn't an accusation. It was a revelation. I paid your father's debt. I transferred the full amount to Harcourt's accounts, completing his ruin, and I bound you to me, where he could not touch you. The marriage, the contract. It was the only way I could legally, completely protect you. It was a shield. She stared at him, at this complex, tortured man. He wasn't a beast. He was a protector. His coldness, his distance, his rage at her entering the studio. It was all a wall of grief and guilt. The wedding night, she whispered, understanding dawning. You slept on the chaise, not because you didn't want me. I slept on the chaise, he interrupted, his voice rough with an emotion she couldn't name. Because I had forced you into this. Because I had bought you like a prized mare to save you from a wolf. I could not, then behave like the monster everyone believes me to be. I would not take what you did not offer. I will never take what you do not freely offer. He had sacrificed his reputation, lived as a recluse, all to protect her. He had married her not for an heir, but for her safety. Madeline slowly walked toward him. He watched her, wary, like a wounded animal. She stopped just before him. She looked at the unfinished portrait of the happy man, and then at the scarred, broken man before her. She did not think. She acted. She reached up, her hand trembling, and did what she had wanted to do since that first night. She gently, tentatively, laid her fingers against the harsh, raised line of his scar. He flinched, his eyes squeezing shut, a sharp intake of breath, but he didn't pull away. "You are not a monster, Arthur," she whispered. He opened his eyes. The ice in them was gone, replaced by a raw, painful, human vulnerability. He covered her hand with his own, pressing her palm flat against his cheek. His skin was warm. The touch was no longer speechless. It was a confession. A new, fragile alliance formed in the shadows of Blackwood Hall. The silence between them was no longer a weapon, but a shared space of understanding. Arthur, the Duke, remained reserved, his habits of 5 years of isolation difficult to break. But he no longer fled from her presence. He began to join her in the library in the evenings. They would sit, not speaking, reading by the fire. Yet it was a companionable silence. He started to talk, not about the past, but about small things, the books he was reading, the progress of the roses. He asked her about her siblings, his voice gruff but his interest genuine. Madeline, in turn, found the courage to reclaim the North Wing. She did not ask his permission. She simply informed Mrs. Croft that the studio was to be cleaned, aired out, and maintained. The housekeeper had merely nodded, a flicker of approval in her stern eyes. Madeline spent her days there, surrounded by Isabella's work. She organized the canvases, cleaned the brushes, and felt a profound connection to the woman she had replaced. She was not Isabella's shadow. She was her successor, her vindicator. One evening, Arthur found her there, staring at the unfinished portrait. She was truly talented, Madeline said softly, not looking at him. She was, he agreed, his voice quiet. He stood beside her, a rare moment of physical proximity. She saw the world in a way I could not. She saw you, Madeline corrected, turning to him. She saw the man behind the scar, before it was even there. She paused, then took the leap. He is not finished, Arthur. Harcourt. His financial ruin is not enough. He is still out there. He's a murderer, and he walks free. Arthur's face hardened. I have no proof, Madeline. Only a diary. My word against his. He would paint me as a grieving madman, still obsessed. A diary, Madeline said, a sudden, sharp idea forming, and a studio full of paint. She walked to a small, dusty cabinet where Isabella had kept her supplies. She mentioned a tonic from Dr. Harris, and she mentioned green, Shealy's green. She pulled out a small, labelled tin. Arsenic. Arthur stared at the tin. It was here, all this time. He used her own studio, her own supplies, to hide his crime, Madeline breathed, a new cold anger rising in her. He and Dr. Harris poisoned her, and he staged her madness and suicide. He thought he was so clever. He thought no one would ever look. It is still not proof, Arthur said, though his voice was tight with renewed purpose. It's circumstantial. Harris is gone. Then we find him, Madeline said, her voice firm. Or we make Harcourt think we've found him. We make him panic. A cornered rat will always show its teeth. For the first time since she had met him, the Duke of Blackwood smiled. It was a terrifying, feral expression that held no humour, only the promise of a predator's victory. You, he said, his voice full of a new, dangerous admiration, are not at all what I expected, Duchess. Neither, she replied, are you. The plan was set. Arthur still held considerable influence. He sent his agents, his eyes and ears in London, not to find Dr. Harris, but to spread the rumour that Dr. Harris had been found. He had his men leak information to known gossips that the new Duchess of Blackwood was restoring the North Wing and had found shocking new evidence regarding the late Isabella's death, including her medical supplies. Then they set the trap. Arthur announced he would be hosting the first grand ball at Blackwood Hall in over 5 years to formally introduce his new Duchess. Society was ablaze with the news. The Beast of Blackwood was re-emerging, and with a new, young wife. An invitation was a command. Everyone would be there, including, as Arthur had calculated, Lord Harcourt. Harcourt could not afford to show weakness. To decline would be an admission of guilt, an admission that the Duke's re-emergence frightened him. He arrived at Blackwood Hall, his face pale but composed, his smile as slick and practiced as ever. The ballroom, once draped in sheets, was a blaze of light. Madeline stood at Arthur's side at the top of the grand staircase, a vision in deep sapphire velvet, the Blackwood diamonds at her throat. She was terrified, but one look at her husband, calm, solid, his gaze fixed on the crowd, steadied her. He is here, Arthur murmured, as the guests were announced. Lord Harcourt, the majordomo called out. The man ascended the stairs. He was handsome in a weak, cruel way. He bowed to Arthur. Your Grace, a pleasure to see you back in society. Your restoration is remarkable. His eyes slid to Madeline. And you, Duchess, you have brought new life to this old place. We are full of surprises, Harcourt, Arthur replied, his voice a smooth, cold stone. So I have heard, Harcourt said, his eyes narrowing slightly. Rumours abound, about the North Wing, about old histories. You must see it, Madeline said, her voice bright and clear, drawing the attention of those nearby. I am having it all restored. It's fascinating what one finds. Poor Isabella's old paints, her tonics. It's a miracle she survived as long as she did, given what Dr. Harris was prescribing. At the mention of the name, Harcourt's smile faltered. His skin went a shade paler. Indeed, he managed, a tragedy. The man, Harris, vanished, I recall. "Oh, but he's been found," Madeline said with a dazzling, innocent smile. "Arthur's men located him in Portsmouth. He was quite forthcoming. He kept meticulous records. Apparently he's eager to clear his name and point the finger at the true culprit. This was the lie. This was the push." Harcourt's face crumpled. The blood drained from it completely. He looked from Madeline's triumphant smile to Arthur's cold, knowing stare. He saw the trap, sprung and clamped shut. You lie," he hissed, his voice low and shaking. "Do I?" Arthur countered, his voice a low growl that carried in the sudden hush. "You murdered my wife. You poisoned her. You tormented her. And you used me to do it." "You have no proof," Harcourt snarled, taking a step back. "I have her diary," Arthur said. "And I have the tin of arsenic you and Harris used, which you so cleverly hid amongst her green paints. And now I have Harris's confession." It was too much. Harcourt's composure shattered. He turned and fled. He didn't walk. He ran, pushing guests aside in his panic to get to the door. But the trap was not just verbal. As Harcourt burst through the main doors, he was met not by his carriage, but by two grim-faced men from the local constabulary, whom Arthur had waiting. "Lord Harcourt," one of the officers said, stepping forward, "you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Isabella, Duchess of Blackwood." Harcourt let out an inhuman scream of rage and despair. It was over. Arthur and Madeline stood on the steps, watching as the man who had haunted their lives was dragged away in chains. The ballroom behind them was silent, the guests stunned. Arthur turned to his wife. His scarred, severe face was, for the first time, clear. The grief, the rage, the 5 years of darkness. It had lifted. "It is done," he said. Madeline looked at him, her heart full. "It is done." He lifted his hand, not to his scar, but to her cheek. His touch was warm, steady, and full of a reverence that made her breath catch. He was no longer the beast. He was just Arthur. And he was her husband. The trial of Lord Harcourt scandalized the nation, but it cleared Arthur's name. The Beast of Blackwood was recast as a tragic hero, and the curse on the hall was broken. Sunlight and laughter returned to its corridors, and the connecting door between the ducal suites was left permanently open. Still, Arthur remained distant. He found Madeline in the rose garden, and, his voice rough with guilt, offered her freedom. He explained the contract was fulfilled. She was safe, and he would provide for her to live separately in London, free from the man she was forced to marry. Madeline looked at the honourable, pained man before her, and refused. She reminded him of his wedding night vow. "You told me you would never take what I did not freely offer." She stepped closer, cupping his scarred cheek. "I am offering, Arthur. The life I want is here. With you." He was stunned, whispering that he didn't know how to be the husband she deserved. "Then we will learn," she replied. She kissed him. It was not the cold brush of their wedding, but a kiss of deep, shared warmth. His arms finally came around her, pulling her close, not as a captor, but as a husband. She had come expecting a monster, but in the heart of the darkness she had found her partner. What a journey from terror to triumph. Lady Madeline walked into a marriage expecting a monster, but instead she found a man more honourable and loving than anyone in society could have imagined. She didn't just save her family, she saved the Duke from his own past, proving that true love can be found in the most unexpected and darkest of places. Were you holding your breath on that wedding night? Did you cheer when Lord Harcourt was finally exposed? If you were moved by Madeline and Arthur's incredible story of sacrifice and redemption, please let us know in the comments below. We love hearing your thoughts. And don't forget to like this video and share it with someone else who loves a story where the hero isn't at all what he seems. Most importantly, make sure you subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell so you never miss another dramatic story like this one. Thanks for listening.